Hello, my name is Heidi Pease, and I am the president of GBBC Giving, which is a nonprofit under the aegis of GBBC and empowering underserved communities globally to mitigate the widening digital divide and democratize access to opportunity, regardless of gender, age, geography, disability, or socioeconomic status. As many of you recall, in February of 2020, the US signed the US-Taliban peace agreement, marking the end of the soon-to-be 20-year Afghanistan conflict and resulting in the takeover by the Taliban of provinces throughout the region. But no one anticipated the rapidity in which the Taliban would take over the entire country. On August 15th, President Ashraf Ghani fled to Uzbekistan, resulting in the fall of the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan. And then there was a flood of evacuees, people stranded, others fleeing to the borders to save their lives. And in fact, many people who helped the US government and allies lost their lives. As the US withdrew, hundreds of thousands of lives turned to volunteers to help them secure emergency services such as safe homes, medical treatment, food and water as they hid from the Taliban. Not to mention the thousands crossing borders into unfriendly territories. And I can say, being one of those volunteers myself, the journey is far from over, and it is critical to remain aware of this horrific situation, despite perhaps our news fatigue. These amazing women that we have on today's panel, through their volunteer service, have contributed to helping many lives both in Afghanistan and abroad. I want to personally thank each of you, Mina, Rahila, and Sophia, for all of the work and efforts that you've been providing. And if I could, I'm sending you a huge virtual hug right now in appreciation of all of the sleepless nights and all of the work that you have contributed in helping the situation. So with that, I would really love to start the panel off if each of you wouldn't mind giving an introduction of yourself, how you've been involved with the Afghanistan crisis, and perhaps describe any Afghan-related projects that you've been working on and any successes that you'd like to share. So let's go ahead. We'll start with Mina, followed by Rahila, and then ending with Sophia.
Thank you so much. Thank you again for having me here. My name is Mina Sharif. I was born in Afghanistan, and my family became a family of refugees to Canada during the Soviet occupation. And I moved back to Afghanistan in 2005 initially as a volunteer, intending to stay for 6 months, but I ended up staying for 15 years. I've worked in a variety of sectors, mostly in children's education, children's media development, such as the Afghan version of Sesame Street. But as with most people in Afghanistan, I've also done a lot of humanitarian work while in Afghanistan. And of course, post August 15th, that has become essentially a full-time job for me. I work with evacuation efforts that continue. I also have assembled a few grassroots projects, again, completely voluntary on everyone's part, that have put together training programs for women who were breadwinners in their family and essentially became unemployed overnight with the Taliban takeover, as well as the food drives, which are not necessarily sustainable long-term projects, but are highly necessary in the emergency state that Afghanistan is, especially with the winter approaching. So prior to August 15th, I was also in the Afghan space from Canada, working on a variety of sort of media-based projects and writings that are meant to start bridging that gap that has been created between the Afghan diaspora around the world and Afghanistan itself. Because much like the rest of the world, Afghan diaspora themselves have been very limited with regards to information about what Afghanistan really is or looks like beyond the headlines and beyond what the news has shown them. So I've seen that gap well before, and it's only been it's only gotten wider. That gap has only gotten wider, I think, since August 15th.
Thank you.
Hi, my name's Rahila Zuffer, and I actually worked in Afghanistan from 2005 to 2008. So that's how I developed, I guess, a lifelong friendship with Mina. And part of the reason why I joined the Ethereum ecosystem was I was really excited about, just what decentralized technologies and improvements of payments, particularly microtransactions, could do in, many countries around the world, including Afghanistan. And it's still a very premature technology, just blockchain in general, but it's becoming like slowly more mature. And when the Taliban took over the country just so swiftly, I don't even know how to describe the word. Me and a group of people from the crypto community created Crypto for Afghanistan. So you can see the website cryptoforafghanistan.com. And our main priority right now is just raising funds to support organizations, many of which Mina has, just through her expertise of living in the country for so long and having such strong connections there, have told us about, that we can raise money for. That at this point, it's providing emergency relief. So we've all seen the stories of people starving in Afghanistan. So tapping into the crypto community as one of the largest charitable groups now in the world, it's been amazing, and making sure that they're aware, and some of that money is funneled into Afghanistan for the humanitarian crisis that's going to be ongoing, sadly. And long term, it would be wonderful, just in our group, once we're kind of past this first phase, to look at what blockchain technology tools could better serve, the communities there.
Amazing. Sophia?
Hi, everyone. I'm Sophia Mafuse. I'm also Afghan, like Mina and Rahila. I was born in Afghanistan. I was a refugee for 8 years on the borders of Pakistan and Afghanistan, and eventually my family found a way to escape to England, like so many other families. The stories that we're going to hear today, the tragedy that's taken place in Afghanistan, is not new. It's happened many, many times through the 80s and 90s and early 2000s. And so I think it's really timely to talk about how technology can transform humanitarian aid. I think it's really important that these conversations can be facilitated, whether it's through how cryptocurrency can impact aid in Afghanistan, or supporting grassroots organizations like Mina has described. My work has been extensive in empowering women and people of disadvantaged backgrounds. I was part of a British parliamentary group put together by a baroness, really focused on supporting women in Afghanistan. That was in England. I'm now currently based in San Francisco, and a lot of the work that I've been doing has been around technology and empowering women. So as CEO of Girls in Tech, which is one of the largest women in tech organizations, we focused on providing coding education and entrepreneurship resources and funding to women across 6 continents and 60 countries. Later on, I started a company that was focused on transforming mental health care and the access to mental health care. And when August 15th hit, like so many other volunteers, Afghans, non-Afghan citizens of the world, I jumped in to focus on providing support during the evacuation period. Since then, we founded Afghan Innovation Foundation, which is really focused on creating a space for Afghans and non-Afghans to come together and be the solution. What was really exciting about what happened in Afghanistan is how people like Heidi, just stood up and decided that they were going to do something about it, and that they had the power and the ability to do something about it. That was hugely inspiring to me. And I think that, with Afghan Innovation, our focus is really truly driving innovation in the country, as well as empowering Afghan and other diverse groups to participate in creating that innovation, and hopefully having a dent in the humanitarian aid ecosystem, which really needs to be disrupted.
Absolutely. Thank you. So let's talk a little bit about I would love to hear from each of the panelists, because you've all lived in Afghanistan, and there's a certain narrative that people who've never been to Afghanistan might just assume of the country, myself included, until I was really involved with this volunteership. So I'd really love to hear, you've lived there in Afghanistan, you had that eyewitness experience, not through a lens that was manufactured by the media. How would you describe life in Afghanistan pre-August 15th? And then how would you describe it post-August 15th? And is there anything that we can do today to help? We'll start with you again, Mina.
Great. I think I would start by saying that it wasn't, not every aspect of Afghan life changed overnight in Afghanistan, in the sense that poverty existed. It was rampant throughout the country the entire 20 years as well. I think there's a misconception that the Taliban also appeared overnight, which is untrue. They had control over a great deal of Afghanistan throughout the entire 20 years. And obviously prior to that, with the international presence coming in after their loss of power, the poor management of this past 20 years, which I'm not going to go too deep into, means that a lot of that was there the entire time. And so that a lot of people have not necessarily felt massive changes to their lives and their livelihood. That being said, what did kind of disappear overnight, or felt like it did, was the hope that had come with the last 20 years that things were going in a better direction, and also the space of security to continue in that direction. So that's something that really felt sudden, and that's where the shock factor was from. A lot of people absolutely did lose their jobs, did lose their livelihoods, but more than anything, felt overnight less secure than they did prior to August 15th. That was the major change, not so much that we were living in a wonderfully set up country on August 14th, and then not so much on the 15th. So there were a lot of problems to begin with. There were a few parts to your question, and I don't want to go on for too long. So I will just say that something that probably will surprise people who don't know about Afghanistan is that we also, as an international community entering the space, were not entering the space that I think we were led to believe we were. Meaning, were we coming into a country where people were just absolutely kind of confused about the concept of women in school, and you were coming into a country that for a few years had been, because of security, living in a sense of fear, and in a sense of that's where their problems were coming from. This is of course coming from my own observation and opinion, but I came to be surprised by the nature of Afghan culture being so much more enthusiastic about women entering schools and working in leadership roles in society. And the reason wasn't a positive reception to what was being shown to them, as much as it was already such a core part of Afghan culture. And because we're not given that impression before experiencing Afghanistan firsthand, it's so easy to think that it didn't exist. It existed for 20 years thanks to the international community, and then it disappeared. So much of what you know about Afghanistan, you do have to reconsider, and maybe remind yourself that we entered a country that had gone through conflict, so that's very security based, and we exit a country that we're leaving in conflict, which is again very heavily security based, more so than it is an issue of our culture being something to be confused about. I don't want to take up more time. So if there's more I can get to.
Actually, just Mina, do you mind clarifying just a little bit then? Is that specific to women's rights and women and girls going to school, meaning that there was already this desire built in, but it was because of the security aspect that
I use that example, but I think, yeah, across the board, we had decided that I put myself in this because I also grew up abroad and had only headlines to go with. I had my parents' stories, which, I knew of the strength of Afghanistan and of its people because I am Afghan and I've seen it through them. But I think I may have allowed it to be, outdated information. So my newer information was only headlines, and that's what I had going in as well. So this is a conception that I think was built just based on the lack of information. So whether it be the in the case of women and girls going to school, or whether it be how Afghans prefer their cities to flourish, how they prefer their cities to flourish, in what direction. It was always just, I think, a misconception that didn't exist. It always has existed. It's more a matter of what did this space exist for? During the Taliban, the space for a lot of things didn't exist that I came to see, such as women in society, women in schools, the support of men towards women, a lot of surprises. I think that list could go on, but how Afghans felt about aid and not wanting aid to go on forever, not wanting projects to be as minimally, if at all, sustainable as they were coming in from the last 20 years. So it was almost across the board. Every assumption that I had subconsciously made was undone once I actually lived in Afghanistan.
Interesting. How about you? I think we just lost, right? Are you there? Oh, how about you, Rahilla?
I would say when I first arrived in 2005, just knowing even that early how much money had gone into the country, to Mina's point, I was surprised by the poverty levels and just the lack of infrastructure that existed even in Kabul for everyday Afghans. So, it was clear that the bulk of the money that we hear about going to Afghanistan was going to the military. And also, to Mina's point, just the military effort seemed like it was just failing from the get-go because, it's been a while since I've been to Afghanistan, but then as the years went on, more and more of the country would be unsafe, like provinces and areas that weren't taken over by the Taliban and, were a lot safer suddenly weren't. So it was, like back when I was there, you could go to Parwan, or you could go by road to Kandahar, you could drive to Badakhshan, which I did. And, it was just very shocking and sad to see over the years, wow, after 20 years of military aid, the situation there is getting worse and not better. On the positive side of 20 years of, foreign involvement, it was amazing to see how entrepreneurial Afghans and just Afghans benefited from a mobile phone sector being built across the country and different types of, and then also mobile payments. And just due to the security issue that Mina and I are mentioning, it was just, you didn't have to worry about people carrying large sums of money, and you could suddenly send things across the country on your phone. There was a banking sector that was suddenly created from scratch that didn't exist during the Taliban. So many Afghans are incredibly entrepreneurial and hardworking. Like, I'd be amazed by how they would just learn another dialect. Like, because there's always, since there has been decades of conflict in Afghanistan, I would hear stories. Oh, at one point I was, working in Iran, so I learned this dialect of Farsi, or, oh, I went and I worked in Pakistan, so then I learned Punjabi. It's just and they just did whatever they needed to do to survive. And it was amazing to see that finally a lot of these entrepreneurs could take small business loans. So that was something that was being established. And as we know in the United States, we wouldn't have Walmart and we wouldn't have so many of these household name companies if you weren't able, small business owners and medium business owners weren't able to take loans. So I feel really bad for the country because, as Mina mentioned, there were men and women that were taking part in that in terms of entrepreneurs. You saw the young girls that won the science competition. And all of a sudden that much of that, anyone that was able to leave left. And then it's very unclear about, what about the next generation of girls or boys, for that matter, that we're going to win a global science competition? And I think also just what's troubling for me, especially, I think Sophia had mentioned that I'm Afghan. I'm not Afghan, but I'm Muslim. But so just to clarify, but as a Muslim woman, just seeing this very gross interpretation of Islam that the Taliban have, where, it's just very, very troubling that how do you change that so there can be, even basic education offered and these women can continue to learn. So it's just all very disturbing and mind-boggling.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you, Rahila. I know that at the end of this panel, we're going to have a video clip from Roya, who will talk a little bit about continuing education despite the Taliban's effort to, either dampen it or eliminate it for girls using, because we have the internet. And it was interesting, you talked about mobility and mobile phones, because really that was the messaging services, WhatsApp, Signal, that we were all involved in during those days right before August 14th and shortly thereafter, on coordinating safe homes and getting people. I remember the day when there was the ISIS bombing at the airport, and we were on these WhatsApp groups, and somebody from some part of the military was sending us messages, get your people out of the airport now, there's going to be a bombing. And it was thanks to this service that we were really able to help. So very fascinating. Sophia, how about you really quickly? I know you got some tech issues there, but would love to hear your thoughts about Afghanistan prior the 15th, after, and then maybe if there's anything that we can do to help. And you are on mute. Yes.
Yes. So I think that this is, Mina and Rahila covered some of the challenges that existed in the country before Afghanistan and will continue to exist now that the US has pulled out of Afghanistan. I think what I'd like to do is use the time to talk about the broader issues with humanitarian aid in countries like Afghanistan. I think that if you look throughout history, countries like Ethiopia, countries like Bangladesh have been, entered by, good intentions by the international community, who have brought enormous humanitarian aid into the country. And by doing so, they've done two things. They have provided immediate relief through, whether it's providing food for the country or providing financial resources to the country. But as part of that, it's actually ended up crippling and breaking down the country's own economy. When a country receives a copious amount of food, international aid, it actually blocks and prevents the country itself from creating its own systems and creating sufficiency. And I think that's an interesting thing, that every country throughout history where this level of aid has been provided to, it has had an immediate benefit and a long-term negative impact, decades of negative impact. And what I am concerned about is the ongoing efforts in Afghanistan and the attention that Afghanistan has had for political reasons, as well as international interests. And so I think that, moving forward, whilst we talk about the challenges the country has, I think it's important to look at it through the lens of what has already existed. I think it's really interesting that right now there's so much interest in providing aid to Afghanistan, and of course the country needs it. As Mina mentioned, winter is here, people are starving, the country is landlocked, so there are some real challenges to getting food brought into the country through its neighboring countries who are not actually supportive. But I think on a broader context, I think it's interesting to look at the repercussions that well-intentioned aid could have on the country, and how it can further cripple the country and create a sense of despondency and helplessness. Afghanistan for the last 45 years has been under war, under occupation, civil wars. And with the United States stepping in for the last 20 years, it's created a pattern of entering the country and then leaving the country, entering the country and leaving the country, and creating some form of false stability and hope with, an injection of cash and then taking all of that away. And that's incredibly destabilizing. And I think moving forward, governments need to be held accountable. We as a community need to think about how we can change the way aid is provided into Afghanistan, and really think about how do we empower the Afghan people to become the agents of solutions for the country, rather than just providing aid for the sake of aid. I would want to see Afghanistan in a stronger position coming out of this, rather than becoming, what happened with Ethiopia and Bangladesh, a country that ends up being crippled by humanitarian aid.
And Sophia, thank you for bringing that up, because it goes, I think, nicely into my next question. Unfortunately, we only have about 4 minutes left. So I'm going to just pose my question to each one of you. Mina, I'd love to talk to you about that humanitarian aid that Sophia was referring to, but in the context of the sewing circles that you've built. And then Rahila, I would love to hear about from you, where do we see crypto or the blockchain community rallying behind this crisis? And then Sophia, I would love for you to finish up with, how did you see technology both during the crisis and post-crisis? So I'll start with you, Mina.
Okay, I'll keep this quick. I think those were excellent points by Sophia, and it's true. I think I use the words often, support versus interference, and I think that we need to acknowledge that the support is owed, because the mess was not made alone. It's been a contribution from the rest of the world for a very long time. On a small scale, you can use the sewing circle example as something that really was done with no overhead, but it does show us that it can be done with minimal, at least, overhead, and it can be done with Afghan management. We were on round 3 of these classes, and it was done via a WhatsApp chat between 3 women sitting in different parts of the world. This is possible. Aid work that is food contributions and food packages has been done with an Afghan made app by an Afghan company, distributed in Afghanistan by Afghans and Afghan volunteers who have access to the entire country. Now, what we can do is start to give that ownership and that and put this in Afghan hands, which is the opposite of interfering. Or we can repeat that same cycle and decide that distribution needs to start from scratch and be handled by massive organizations from outside of Afghanistan, paying themselves to do that same work. And then when we walk away from that, we either have, we can start with aid work, and then that's how you move into building Afghanistan's economy, or allowing Afghanistan to build its own economy. So the difference between support and interference, I think it'd be great to always have those 2 words in mind, and try to think about which area we're heading more into in any given case.
Yep. Very important. And how can the blockchain community support rather than interfere, Rahila?
Well, the organization that Mina mentioned that's able to distribute all over the country, that's run by Afghan, is a SEAL. And they're, very tech savvy. So I think that for, Crypto for Afghanistan, we're raising money. We're working with some of the leading NFT artists over the next year, doing drops to give money to them. And what's great about them is they have set up a wallet, and they want to learn, more about blockchain technology and what this innovation is. And we really need to, those are the people we need to educate that would know how to navigate the country and build the best tools with decentralized technologies to provide better support and opportunities. And also what Farashta is doing in terms of payments, through Code to Inspire. It's the first coding school in Afghanistan in Herat. Maybe not the first, if I'm not sure what others are doing, but one of the few. And, once these young women, or men have skills, they can easily get paid through crypto, just given the situation of the banking system. And lastly, I would say the sanctions issue, that, it's just very hard for anyone to operate that wants to help, like the same tech innovation that may be going on in other parts of the world with the same issues. I think that, the sanction situation is just something that needs to be sorted out in terms of how can the community engage.
Mm-hmm.
I guess one example is there was an education grant given in Iran, and then they had to take it back. And this was just translating things into Farsi because they're like, well, we're American and you're sanctioned. You're a sanctioned country. So I think we just sort of need to reevaluate sanctions.
So with sanctions, I'm not sure, Sophia, I know there are sanctions right now. Is there anything that you've done or are doing using technology despite the sanctions with some of your evacuation initiatives?
Yeah, absolutely. Firstly, I wanted to say that this is a really exciting time. It leads on to what happened with the Syrian refugee crisis and the inbound of people coming to Greece, and the volunteers that gathered and physically went to Greece to help with the evacuation efforts. That has become totally digital with the Afghan evacuation efforts, where armed by Signal, WhatsApp, Google Sheets, people are able to run entire evacuation operations. So I think that's tremendous, and I think it's a positive, positive, point to where we're going towards in terms of how humanitarian aid and emergency situations are going to be handled. I think it's really wonderful to see that. I think moving forward, it's interesting to see how technology is going to really disrupt the space. I think there's interesting potential for technology to help by telehealth. I think refugees all around the world, 80 million people, need mental health services, other types of telehealth services, education around healthcare and self-health. And I think that despite sanctions, technology has a way to seep into people's lives and actually help them. And so I think that's really positive. In Afghan innovations, in our evacuation efforts, we've been incredibly fortunate because we've been able to directly connect with governments and royal families and have intimate conversations about what needs to happen. And we've seen an incredible generosity from both governments all the way to small grassroots nonprofit organizations who have stood up, completely prioritized supporting the Afghan people during evacuation efforts. So I think, what we've been doing is really building out a network of groups of people, despite political tensions, despite sanctions, to really talk about the greater good of humanity and how governments can feel empowered. Because I think the difference is we're shifting the narrative from refugees being helpless to governments getting access to an incredible talent pool. Refugees are the highest group of earners in countries. And this is something that is often not mentioned. But if you look at the research, refugees have the highest growth potential because they're literally in survival mode. So I think that's really important to emphasize. These aren't helpless people. These are highly incredible people who, if given the opportunity, spur the economy and bring innovation into countries. So I think that's something that has helped us change the conversation around, who you're actually allowing access to. This is not a position of, power and supporting someone who's helpless. It's really, you're getting more than you're actually giving. You're giving someone an opportunity to enter your country, but what you're getting is the most incredible, loyal, hardworking individual who's going to bring innovation into your country. So I'll stop there.
I think that was a beautiful way to end this actual panel, that you're absolutely right. So many of these people are truly beautiful, and this is really an opportunity for us. And I know, Sophia, you've been working on some scholarship programs as well. And I think with that said, unfortunately, the panel is closing, but would love to work with each one of you on some fundraising initiatives and would love to continue to keep the GBBC community aware of some of these fundraising projects that each one of you, myself included, are working on. And so thank you so much. Again, I'm sending you the biggest virtual hug. Thank you for all of your work and dedication, helping to really save and improve lives both in Afghanistan and abroad, all around the world.